The silence of a late Friday afternoon in Washington is usually the breath before a weekend of calculated leaks and staged optics. But last Friday, the silence was broken by the sound of a digital guillotine. While you were finishing your work week, while you were planning a dinner you can barely afford, the data monitors at the Federal Reserve and the Census Bureau began flashing a rhythmic, pulsing red. It was the sound of a heartbeat flatlining. The numbers that flickered across the terminals didn't just suggest a slowdown, they signaled a catastrophic evaporation of the American middle class. We have been told for months that the economy is roaring, that the Make America Great Again engine is firing on all cylinders, but the mask has just been ripped off, revealing a skeletal remains of a system that has finally run out of other people's money. The shock came in two waves, a localized earthquake followed by a global tsunami. First, the total consumer indebtedness figure didn't just creep up, it exploded to a staggering $5.1 trillion. But it's the composition of that debt that should make your blood run cold. In a single month, one solitary month of December, revolving credit, the high-interest plastic chains we call credit cards, surged by an eye-watering 12%. This isn't growth. This is a survival reflex. This is the collective scream of millions of families who realized they couldn't put Christmas dinner or heating oil on a paycheck that has been vaporized by the very policies Trump claims are saving them. It was triple what the consensus estimates predicted. The experts were blindsided because they still believed the lie that the consumer is healthy. As the sun set, the second blade fell. U.S. retail and food service sales for that same period came back at a literal 0% growth. Do you understand the mathematical horror of those two numbers combined? Credit card debt spiked by double digits while actual spending remained flat. This means Americans didn't go on a holiday shopping spree. They went into deep predatory debt just to stay exactly where they were. They hit a wall. The holiday cheer was a hollow facade, a ghost town of commerce where the only thing moving was the interest rate ticker. The Great American Comeback is a cinematic illusion, a high-budget trailer for a movie that doesn't exist. Behind the golden curtains of the Mar-a-Lago lifestyle, the engine room is on fire, and the man at the helm is currently reaching across the aisle to his most bitter enemies in a desperate, panicked attempt to put out a fire he spent years stoking. The realization is beginning to sink in. The system isn't just broken, it has been looted, and you are the one holding the bill for a party you weren't invited to. The mainstream media narrative is a carefully curated hallucination designed to keep you tranquilized while the lifeblood is drained from your bank account. They point to the top 10% of earners, the elite class who benefit from asset inflation, and tell you their luxury is your prosperity. It is a lie. The mechanism of this crisis is a sophisticated form of financial cannibalism. While Trump parades around with the slogan of national pride, his actual economic architecture is a playground for the vulture capitalists who view your household as a distressed asset to be liquidated. The reality is that the consumer is being sacrificed at the altar of extreme inequality, and the world has noticed. Global markets are no longer looking at the United States with envy. They are looking with predatory intent and profound disgust. Tourism plummeted by 5% last year, not because of travel costs, but because the world is repulsed by the volatility and the perceived betrayal of the American promise. The technical horror of this moment lies in the liquidity crisis currently suffocating the average home. We are witnessing a massive disconnect between the cost of capital for the elites and the cost of survival for the citizen. When the Federal Reserve pivots to save the business sector, they drop rates to near zero, allowing corporations to go through a massive refinancing cycle. They swapped their expensive debt for cheap money, padding their coffers with trillions. But did that liquidity trickle down? No. It was used to pump up asset prices, homes, stocks, and real estate, creating a black swan environment where the core assets of your life have increased in price far beyond any marginal wage growth. You are paying for their cheap debt through your skyrocketing rent. It is a closed-loop system of extraction where the corporate class borrows at 2% and lends it back to you at 21%. This is the hidden mechanism, a deliberate tax placed on the American worker by a leadership that claims to be their champion. Trump's recent kumbaya moment with Elizabeth Warren regarding a cap on credit card interest rates is not an act of populist heroism. It is a confession of guilt. He knows the solvency of the American household is at a breaking point. He knows that the commercial interest rate on credit cards has doubled in a decade, moving from 14% to a criminal 21%. This spike happened under his watch and through the continuation of the very deregulatory environment he championed. The credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard are reporting record profits, $20 billion and $15 billion respectively, with net margins of 50%. They are not service providers, they are state-sanctioned pirates. The global reaction is even more ominous. U.S. Treasuries are now carrying a risk premium, a polite term for a lack of trust in our fundamental stability. Other nations are backing away from the dollar because they see a nation that has abandoned its middle class in favor of a debt-fueled mirage. When the world loses faith in the American consumer, the entire global mechanism begins to shudder. We are seeing the early stages of a margin call on the American dream. The external factor here is a world that is preparing for a post-American economic reality, while you are told to keep swiping your card to keep the lights on. The mechanics of the crisis are simple. The elites have privatized the gains of the low-interest era and are now socializing the losses of the inflation era onto your credit card balance. It is a masterpiece of economic warfare, and the man who promised to make America great again is the one who signed the orders. To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, we have to look past the cold, clinical spreadsheets of the Federal Reserve and look into the eyes of a man like Frank in Ohio. Frank is 62 years old. He has spent 40 years following the rules, working a job that promised him a dignified sunset. But Frank's sunset has been replaced by a neon-red digital glow of a banking app that won't stop screaming. Every morning, before the coffee is even brewed, Frank stares at the screen of his phone, watching the liquidity crisis of his own life play out in real time. He is not a gambler. He is a victim of a system that has made basic survival a predatory act. For Frank, the Make America Great Again promise isn't a red hat or a rally. It was supposed to be a stable price for eggs, a manageable utility bill, and the ability to sleep through the night without the phantom weight of a margin call on his soul. Instead, Frank is living through a psychological horror. The statistics say retail sales were flat, but for Frank, that 0% represents a series of agonizing no's. No to new shoes for his grandson. No to the medication he started splitting in half to make the bottle last until the next cycle. No to the sense of pride he once felt as a provider. He is now part of the $5.1 trillion shadow, a ghost in the machine of revolving credit. When the administration brags about consumer spending, they are talking about the top 10% buying yachts in Florida. They aren't talking about Frank putting a tank of gas on a credit card with a 21% interest rate just so he can drive to a job that no longer pays for his life. This isn't spending. It's a slow-motion car crash where the airbag has been replaced by a collection notice. The anxiety is visceral. It's a tightening in the chest when the mail carrier walks up the driveway. It's the calculated silence between him and his wife as they pretend they aren't both thinking about the same balance sheet. The human cost is the evaporation of the future. Frank's savings haven't just been spent, they have been vaporized by asset inflation that he had no part in creating. He watches as the houses in his neighborhood, the ones that used to be owned by people like him, are snapped up by faceless private equity firms using the cheap capital that the elites refuse to share. Frank is being squeezed out of his own life by a black swan event that never ends. He is the collateral damage of a leadership that views his desperation as a healthy consumer trend. To the people in the high-rise offices, Frank is just a data point to be manipulated. To himself, he is a man drowning in a sea of high-interest plastic, waiting for a rescue that is never coming. As the American household implodes, the contrast in Washington couldn't be more obscene. While Frank in Ohio is debating whether to turn on the heat, the corridors of power are echoing with the hollow sound of political theater. This is where the betrayal becomes a deliberate act of economic warfare. Donald Trump's sudden, desperate outreach to Elizabeth Warren, a woman he has spent years mocking, is the ultimate proof of his duplicity. This isn't a meeting of the minds, it's a panic room strategy. Trump has had years to dismantle the predatory mechanisms of the credit card industry. Instead, he spent his tenure ensuring the business class had a direct pipeline to zero-interest money while the consumer class was left to the wolves. His slogan, "Make America Great Again," has been revealed as a cynical marketing mask for a regime that prioritized the profits of the 50% margin-rich Visa and MasterCard over the solvency of the American family. The betrayal is layered and bipartisan, a system that works in perfect unison to ensure you never get ahead. While Trump postures as a populist, his policies have been a gift to the very elites he claims to despise. He speaks of capping rates now, but where was this urgency when the interest rates began their catastrophic climb? Where was the protection for the consumer when the junk fees were being woven into every transaction? This is the technical horror of the political class. They create the fire and then ask for your vote to bring the water that is actually just more gasoline. The administration knows the debt levels are unsustainable. They see the same PPI data we see, forecasting even more inflation for 2026. They see the bankruptcies skyrocketing and the student debt defaults mounting. Yet, their response is more tariffs that increase input prices, further crushing the people they promised to save. This is not incompetence. It is a calculated liquidity trap. By keeping the consumer in a permanent state of high-interest debt, the political elite ensures a compliant, desperate workforce that cannot afford to protest or pivot. Trump's loyalty is not to the worker in the factory, it is to the asset class that fuels his lifestyle and his power. He has used the language of the forgotten man to build a platform for the most unforgettable greed in American history. The kumbaya moment with Warren is a distraction, a band-aid on a cancerous wound. Even if a temporary cap were enacted, it is a one-year gimmick designed to get through an election cycle before the shark-infested waters of the debt market swallow the consumer whole. The leadership hasn't failed to protect us. They have successfully exploited us. They have turned the American dream into a subprime loan, and they are currently betting against your ability to pay it back. The stage is set for a catastrophic denouement that the history books will record as the Great Evaporation. We began this journey with a single Friday afternoon, a quiet moment where the data revealed a double-digit explosion in credit card debt while actual retail spending flatlined. It was the moment the American consumer finally hit the floor. But as we look toward the horizon of late 2026, the scene is far grimmer. The hidden mechanism of asset inflation and predatory capital costs is no longer a theory. It is a visible, physical rot. The "Make America Great Again" engine hasn't just stalled, it is backfiring into the faces of the very people who built it. Trump's desperate policy pivots, the frantic talk of rate caps and populist band-aids, are the final twitching movements of a regime that has realized the credit card is maxed out, the collateral is gone, and the elites have already moved their chips to safer shores. The dark forecast for the remainder of 2026 is one of systemic imploding. We are entering the technical horror of the delayed tariff pass-through. While the administration claimed the world was paying for our prosperity, the reality is that the $1,700 tax per household is now fully hitting the checkout line. The PPI data shows a massive pipeline of cost increases that will peak by mid-year, just as the liquidity crisis reaches its breaking point. We are looking at a black swan of widespread insolvency. Chapter 11 and personal bankruptcies are already at decade highs, and the human cost, the millions of francs in Ohio, will soon find that even their predatory lines of credit have been cut. The banks, sensing the blood in the water, are beginning their margin calls on the middle class. The housing market, propped up by the false floor of corporate ownership, is shivering as rent defaults begin to surge. The political betrayal is now complete. The leadership has successfully transitioned the nation from a productive economy to a debt extraction colony. Trump's loyalty has never been to the forgotten man. It was to the system that allows him to remain the landlord of a ghost town. By late 2026, the risk premium on U.S. debt will translate into a permanent state of high interest for you, while the billionaires continue to enjoy the fruits of the deregulation blitz. The world is no longer coming to save us. They are de-risking from us. Global tourism is down, global investment is fleeing, and the American dollar is no longer a safe haven. It is a debt instrument with a countdown timer. The us versus them frame is no longer a perspective. It is a front line. This is the end of the line for the healthy consumer lie. The storm isn't approaching, it has made landfall. The system has chosen its winners, and unless you are in that top 10%, you are the fuel for their fire. The elites are prepared, they are liquid, they are diversified, and they are watching from the safety of their gated financial fortresses as the household debt bubble they created finally pops. You must see the reality behind the golden optics. You must understand that every slogan was a distraction from a heist. The "Make Great American Again" promise was the lure for a trap that has now snapped shut on the American household. The time for wait and see is over. The solvency of your future depends on your realization that the man at the top isn't your savior. He's the liquidator. Stay liquid. Stay prepared. The storm is here.